Well, happy Mother's Day one more time. I want to welcome everybody who's sitting in all of our different venues this morning. I want to thank you guys so much for being here. As you can tell, we're right in the middle of a series that we've started called Parenting Through the Proverbs. And we're looking at the book of Proverbs to see what kind of godly wisdom that we can find from there, specifically about this topic of parenting. Now, we've been talking about the different stages of parenting, and we said this a couple weeks ago, that when we parent ages 1 through 5, we're going to lead with discipline. So we're going to draw some loving boundaries around their lives, and then we're going to lovingly reinforce those boundaries over and over and over. Last week we talked about the elementary years, and we said that it's important during those years to give your children responsibility. Because if you want your children to be responsible later on in life, if you want them to haul large loads later on in life, they got to learn how to haul small loads right now. Now, today we're going to talk about how it is that we parent the teen years. And I don't know if you know this, but they started making a mannequin for teenagers. Did you know that? Looks kind of like this right here. I think Mark Twain probably said it best when he said, when you have a 13-year-old, you stick them in a barrel and you feed them through the knot hole, but when they turn 16 years old, you just seal the knot hole. Right? But we're not going to do that here. Today we want to talk about how it is that we can not only survive, but how it is that we might thrive during the teenage years. And in order to do that, we've got to focus on this principle right here. Are y'all ready for it? This principle is this, that the quality of your relationship with your children will determine the weight of your influence. That the quality of your relationship with your children will determine the weight of your influence. In other words, that the quality of the relationship that you have with your parents right now determines how much you want to listen to them, right? I mean, let me ask you this. If you had a dad in your life who was never really there as a child, maybe he left the home at a very early age in order to start a second family or a third family. And what if that dad all of a sudden reappeared into your life and had all sorts of advice for you about your marriage and your family? Do you think you'd be open to that advice? Someone say no? Absolutely not. And why is that? There would be this emotional wall between the two of you because your dad did not put in the hard work of building that relationship. On the flip side, can I tell you this? Some of you are in your 30s, you're in your 40s, you're in your 50s. You love going to your mom and dad for advice. And if that's the case, you know why that is? It's because there's this quality of relationship that already exists there. What does that principle say? Again, that the quality of the relationship determines the weight of your influence. Now, you might say today, well, duh. That's pretty obvious, preacher man. Tell me something that I don't know. But let me ask you this. As a parent, do you love to listen to your teenager? Do you love, first of all, do you seek, first of all, to understand them and their perspective and their circumstance, or do you only seek to be understood because you're the one who owns the house, and as long as you live under my roof and it's my way or the highway? In all situations, are you determined to try and sit down and rationally discuss the situation to come to a compromise to see if both sides can win, or are you determined simply to be right? Here's what I want to say. When you as a parent in those teenage years begin to transition the relationship from I'm big and I'm dad and I can get the spank and I can force you to do whatever I want you to do, when you begin to transition that relationship towards why don't we sit down and speak like two rational human beings to see if the both of us can win in this situation, what I'm trying to say is that you're not being a pushover. You know what you're doing? You're valuing the relationship over the rules. Now, are rules important? Someone say yes. Oh, you better believe it. In my house, we are a nation of laws. However, this is what I've realized in leading my family, and this is what I've realized in leading my staff, and that is this principle right here. You all know this to be true, that rules without relationship will always lead to rebellion. You know that from your dictator mom and dad, maybe that you might have had. You know that from your dictator boss that you've had that just marched into your office and slapped down a memo. That, in other words, as being a parent, that being right isn't always the goal. So what is the goal? How do we build up that relationship so we can have that weight of influence in our teenager's life? Well, here's the first point that I want you to think about. The first principle is this right here, that we need to encourage, encourage, encourage. Would you all turn to your neighbor and say, encourage, encourage, encourage? Do it. Turn to your other neighbor and say, you look good. See how good that feels? When somebody encourages you. Here's what I want you to think about today. In your child's life, I want you to be the CEO of your child's life. I want you to be the chief encouragement officer of your teenager. And the Bible, I like that. Somebody else is just as cheesy as I am. But the Bible pretty much says the same thing. Proverbs chapter 18, verse 21, it says this, that the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 18 says this, that the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but the tongue of the wise bring, would y'all say that word with me? Bring healing. In other words, you know what we usually say as parents? We usually say this, well, I'm just keeping it real. Well, I'm just speaking the truth. And if you can't handle the truth, well, that sounds more like a you problem than a me problem, when the Bible might have issues with the way that you're saying it. Because again, if we look at that verse, it says this, that the words of the reckless pierce like swords, but if you watch what you say, if you measure your words, then you will bring healing. The next verse is one of my favorite verses in the entire Bible, and that's Proverbs chapter 25, verse 11. It says this, that a word aptly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. In other words, let me translate that for you. In other words, one of the most important things that you can do for your child is to watch what you say, not only to watch what you say, but to watch how you say it, the tone in which you say it, because is nonverbal communication important? Yes, they say that nonverbal communication is 80% of the communication. So not only do you need to watch what you say, you're going to watch how you say it, and you're going to also watch the timing in which it's said. In other words, if your son has just come 2 hours late at 2 a.m. because he's broken curfew, right then is not the time to talk about it. Here's what you're going to do as a parent. You're going to say, why don't you go to bed right now? Me? I'm also going to go to bed right now. Because cooler heads will prevail in the morning. One of the most important things that you can do for your child is to watch what you say, but to watch how you say it, and to watch when you say it. Because what you'll find simply in the book of Proverbs is that over and over and over it talks about how it is that you and I are to use our words. It uses words like what? Like tongue, like words, like mouth, like lips, over 150 times just in the book of Proverbs, which means that it talks about how we use our speech on average of 5 times each chapter. All I'm trying to say is that this is really important stuff. In fact, the greatest determination of the kind of health of relationship that you have with your teenager is how it is you choose to use your words. So here's a question I have for you. It's this question right here. So how do you talk to your teen? How do you talk to your teen? I got a teenager volunteer, Chris, to come up here. Chris is going to come up here. Can we all give him a huge round of applause? Can we do that? let's say, Chris, that you are my teenage child. You can come close to me. I won't bite you. That's okay. I know we don't look anything alike, but you are my teenage child, and I'm going to be your very, very young father, okay? Now, Chris, I have $100 here that you are not going to keep, sorry. But this $100 is representative of the kind of relationship, the quality of relationship that I have with him. We're going to call this an emotional bank account. That money, nice try, represents the quality of relationship that I have with my child. And every time I say something nice, what I do is I make a deposit in your account. But every time and you're going to smile, oh, thanks, gee, Dad. But every time I say something mean and nasty, then I'm going to make a withdrawal from that account. Okay? So this is typically how we talk to our teenager, and all in the morning, by the way. Okay? So here you go. We're starting off on a good foot. I got a good relationship with you, but I wake up in the morning. First thing I say at 6:30 in the morning is this: get up, Chris, or you're going to be late again. Okay? Now, he's already got it. He already knows. Am I making a deposit or am I making a withdrawal? I'm making a withdrawal, aren't I? So, okay, yeah, give that to me. Not like you did anything with your life. Okay, at 6:45, 15 minutes later, I'm going to say it like this: you look like you just came out of a punk rock video. Why don't you put on something decent? Did I make a deposit or a withdrawal? I mean a withdrawal. Give me that. Okay. Now, 5 minutes later at 6:50, I'm going to say this: do you have to be on a screen like all day long? Because back in my day, I just read scrolls. Thanks, that was meant to be funny. So, okay, made another withdrawal. At 7 a.m., I'm going to say this: your room, Chris, is a disgrace. When are you going to get your stuff together? Oh, this is hitting close to home. Woo! Okay, at 7:05, I'm going to say, don't use your new iPhone in the bathroom. You're going to drop it in the toilet again. Okay, so I'm going to give me that. So at 7:10, I'm going to say this: hey, dummy. You're not supposed to laugh when I say that. Hey, dummy, you forgot to take out the trash again, and because thanks to you, we're going to be up to our ears in garbage all week long, right? I mean, we're going to make a withdrawal, and that's all of what we say just in the morning, right? Withdrawal after withdrawal after withdrawal after withdrawal after withdrawal. Someone once said this right here: be careful with your words. They can only be forgiven, but not forgotten. Right? Let's all give Chris a huge round of applause. Chris, I got this right here for you. Give me the rest of that money. Okay. I love you, Chris. Okay. Now what I'm trying to say is this. As parents, you're going to make tons of mistakes. Have you made tons of mistakes in this area? That's okay, because you're going to make a lot more mistakes. I have lost my religion on my children before, where the situation ended up with me taking all of my boys' electronics and throwing them in the trash while the neighbors looked through the windows going, I think he's a pastor. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to make huge mistakes. But what I'm trying to say is that fortunately for me, at that time, I just so happened to have the emotional reserves in my child's life to make a huge withdrawal. And you can make big mistakes, and you can make huge withdrawals, but just make sure you have the emotional reserves to absorb that mistake. See, oftentimes what we do is we do this. We make withdrawal after withdrawal after withdrawal after withdrawal after withdrawal. And then you know what happens? They end up staying out late. They end up doing something stupid with their friends. They end up rolling their eyes and disobeying you. And while they are completely and totally responsible for their actions, and while they still need to be disciplined for their actions and their attitudes, what I'm also trying to say is this, that maybe you also contributed a little bit to it by bankrupting and overdrawing on their account to begin with. So how do we get out of that frame of mind? How do we make more withdrawals? How do we make more deposits than we're making withdrawals? Well, I think in order to do that, we've got to focus on this principle right here, and that is this. Don't just see what is, see what could be. I don't want you to just see what is in your child's life. I want you to see what could be, because I understand what you see right now. What you see is a dirty room, a whole bunch of laundry, and a whole mess of bad grades. That's what you see right now. But here's what I want to challenge you to do as a parent of teenagers. I want to challenge you to see what could be in their life. The book that we just looked at, and to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street, it was Dr. Seuss's most difficult book to get published because it was his first book. And so we wrote this book, and Dr. Seuss had this vision. He had this vision of what kind of children's author that he could be, that maybe in the future, that maybe he could mark the lives of children for generation and generations to come. And so he went to his first publishing house, and it got rejected. He went to his second publishing house, and that got rejected too. Third, fourth, fifth. People were saying, Dr. Seuss, you know what? I think this is nothing more than a pipe dream. Just go ahead and leave this. Go do something else. But this vision wouldn't let go of him. So he got rejected by his 10th, 11th, 15th. He got rejected by 27 different publishing houses. And while it would have been so easy for him to give into his own self-pity, self-discouragement, and self-defeat, he still maintained that vision of what could be. And finally, at his 28th publishing house, they decided that they were going to take his book, and he ended up selling over 650 million copies, making him arguably the most influential children's author in the history of America. And all because he had a vision of what could be. Now, I know with your child, it's so easy to want to, your teenager, they're arrogant, and they're not self-aware, and they're pompous, and they're too sure of themselves. And it's because of that a lot of times that we want to just beat them down and put truth in their place and just kind of show them how it is. And if you would just learn this, everything would be okay. But you know this, especially because you feel like this, and they're even a lot younger than you are, that they are fragile individuals. And if you allow that child to indulge their self-pity and self-defeat and self-discouragement, then what could be never will be in their lives. Because as parents in particular, your words are so important to your child that it is no exaggeration to say that your words in your child's life, that it holds the power of life and death. That your words over your teenage child, they are not simply words. You know what they are? They are self-fulfilling prophecies that you are speaking over your child's life. And every time you say something like, you know what, my kid he's not that good in school, and he's just not that smart, and he doesn't apply himself all that much. You and I somehow in our own sick minds think that that's some kind of motivating factor. But you know what we're really doing? We're really casting self-fulfilling prophecy over that child's life. When you say things like, no, my child is so disobedient, and they're so entitled, and they got it so good. I don't understand why they're so spoiled like that. It's amazing that the voice that we speak into our child, how that ultimately becomes the voice of how it is that they begin to speak to themselves, doesn't it? And here's the thing that I try and do as a parent. As much as is possible, I try not to accuse my child of certain things and to say, you're so fill in the blank, you're so lazy, you're so entitled, you're so whatever the case may be. You know what I try and do? I try and say this, that, Nathan, when you did that, it was just so unlike you. because you're normally so kind. And you're normally so gentle. And you're normally so gracious. All of a sudden, we're casting a different kind of vision over them, aren't we? It's amazing the kind of power that our words have over our children. Every once in a while, I play golf with my mother. Now, I'm not very good. I only play like a couple times a year. My mom plays all the time. But I'll go and play golf with my mother, and then every once in a while, I will hit a good shot. And you know what my mom will say? She'll say, 세종아. That's my Korean name, okay? She'll say, 세종아, good shot. Good shot. Right? And here's what I want to say. I'm 45 years old. And when my mother tells me that I hit a good shot, all of a sudden I remember what it's like to be an 8-year-old child. To have somebody else think that I'm valuable. To have somebody else tell me that I did a good job. To have somebody else tell me that, that everything's not falling apart in my life. I think the most important visions are not the kind of visions that are cast on a stage like this to rooms full of people. I think the most important visions are not communicated in the boardroom or, to investors or whatever the case may be. I think the most important visions that are ever communicated are the visions that are cast in a child's room between 8 and 9 o'clock at night. As we go into that child's room and stroke their head and say, you know what? I can't wait to see how God uses you in the future. I'm so proud of the person that you're becoming. Isn't it true that encouragement is the fuel, is the food of the human soul? Isn't it? I mean, I've never heard anybody say this. You know what? I am fed up with your encouragement. In fact, I have had it up to here with your encouragement. And if you encourage me one more time, I'm going to explode. Never heard anybody say that, but I have heard a lot of people say the exact opposite. Would you be the chief encouragement officer in your child's life? Not only do you need to encourage your child, but there's another flip side that you need to kind of balance things out with your teenage child, and that is the fact that you need to teach them self-discipline. And that you need to teach them self-control. Proverbs chapter 25-28 says this, like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks. Would y'all say that with me? So why does a city have walls around it? Because it wants to be protected. It wants to protect from foreign invaders. It wants to protect it from, to ensure its prosperity. I like the way that Eugene Peterson translates this in the Message because it's got a little bit more of a modern flair to it. And he says this, that a person without, or let me say this, a teenager without self-control is like a house with its doors and windows knocked out. Okay, I want you to think about this for a second. I want you to picture a house that does not have any doors and any windows. That house all of a sudden is very vulnerable, isn't it? That house cannot anymore protect you from the two things that you want a house to protect you from, and that is the elements and from robbers. But all of a sudden you seem very vulnerable because those things aren't there. And what Solomon is saying is, so is it with the teenager who lacks self-control. So is it with the teenager and the person who lacks self-discipline. You know where your daughter's going to learn self-control? In the way that she dresses. And so I know that every single morning you feel like you have a World War III over what it is that she can wear. And she'll say stuff like this. You know what? Like everyone else is wearing this stuff. And you know what you're going to say? If you've never known what to say, here's what I want you to say. Well, everyone else is stupid. Now you are about to make a huge withdrawal. So I hope you got some reserves in there to absorb that mistake. But here's the thing. When you teach your daughter something like that, you're not only teaching her what's appropriate and inappropriate, you're teaching her the value of self-control, right? I come from an immigrant family. And one of the things that I am so thankful for with my parents is that they worked so hard to provide for me and my sisters. And because of that, there were some times where they had to go to work early, or maybe my dad was off on a business trip every once in a while. And I'm so thankful for that because during that period, I had to be responsible. I had to be able to take care of certain things in my life at times. And here's the thing, I want to pass on those same traits to my son. So my teenage son, you know what he has to do? He has to set his alarm clock at night because mommy and daddy are not going to get him up in the morning. And it's not because we can't get him up in the morning. It's because we want him to begin to learn self-discipline. There are times where he has to make his own breakfast. He must do his own laundry every week in our house. He must do all of his homework without mommy and daddy reminding him when all of his tests and quizzes are coming. And we're not doing that because we're lazy. We're not doing that because we don't want to be helpful. You know why we're doing that? Because I tell him this, son, in this period of our relationship, here's what we're doing. We're practicing what it's going to be like in a couple years when you leave me forever. See, son, you leaving the nest is not a someday anymore. See, you leaving the nest is like, I can count those number of days. And whereas before you and I had 18 summers together, I don't understand how it is that I can count the number of summers on one hand. And so very shortly, son, the nature of your relationship and my relationship is about to change. But as that's going to happen, here's my promise to you, son, that I'm going to promise not to treat you like a child. You like that? You like that idea? Yeah, because I'm like a man now. Okay, I get it. My promise to you is that I will not treat you like a child. But your promise to me then is that you will act like an adult. That during this season of our relationship, here's what I'm going to do, even though I do not want to do it. I'm going to practice losing control of your life in the promise that you will practice gaining control of your life. And that you will practice being responsible during this time. Because we're just practicing right now. We're practicing. And as you're teaching your child to be responsible, oh man, I'm a mess today, sorry. As we're teaching our children to become responsible, and as we begin practicing what it's like to be a part, here's what they need to understand most of all. Here's what you need to teach them, and that is this principle, that what you do in private, though, is where you form your credibility. That in other words, that when we talk about self-restraint, that guess what, son? We're not just talking about your life. We're talking about your character. We're talking about who it is that you choose to become when no one else is looking. Because unlike any other time in your life, son, you have the opportunity and the capability to hide certain things from mommy and daddy. And that's not what we want you to do. For your own benefit, we don't want you to go building a private life and a public life. We don't want you to go building an Instagram life and then the life that you show everybody else. We don't want you to pretend to be like mommy and daddy's perfect little angel in the light while you're hiding your browser history in the dark. We don't want you to pretend like you're our perfect little student of the month when we're all together, and then you go off and then all of a sudden you talk a certain way with your friends or you act a certain way with your friends. That you must have a unity in who you are between your public life and your private life. And if there's something in your private life that we need to talk about, please bring it out into the light, because we're going to talk about it. But here's the warning that I have for you, son, that if you keep your private life continually private, at some point your private life is going to end up catching up to you. Here's the bullseye on the target for me and Andrea. The bullseye on the target for me and Andrea is that one day we want it so that our children want to come back and see us. We're really looking forward to Thanksgivings in the future, because if all of my children have 5 children each, then we'll have 37 people over at our house for Thanksgiving. And we want it to be like this. We want it to be like this, where the kids and the grandkids are like, hey, let's load up the car. We get to go to Eastvale, California, instead of like this. Oh, we got to go visit your parents again. And so why don't we do this about 3 hours into the trip? Why don't you just kind of pinch the baby, and then the baby will start crying, and maybe we can leave then? Like, I don't want that. See, here's what I want to do in my child's life. I want to be able to now strategically orient myself in my child's life so that when my children is at the stage in life where they are making the most important decisions, like who it is that they should marry, or what major they should have, or what kind of job they should take, that they would want to come to me and they would want to say this, hey dad, can I talk to you about something? Because I never seem to get very good advice from my friends. So I just thought maybe we could meet up for lunch or something like that. See, and what I'm trying to say is this, that if I want to enjoy the rewards of parenting then what I have to do now is I got to make some pretty strategic and pretty consistent investments in their life that go beyond I'm big and I'm dad and I can make you, or I have a larger bank account than you do, or I can hold the cell phone and keys over you. It's got to go beyond that, and it's got to move towards this. Son, daughter, I love you. I'm always going to believe in the best in you. And guess what? Daddy will always be your biggest cheerleader. Why don't you bow your heads and pray with me?